Let's just start with where we are. At the very minimum, to have a clearly stated purpose, which can expand then into a mission and what are our shared values, but as kind of an umbrella term, just a shared purpose, clear agreements. So I think I've been learning that conflict is just showing us where we need more clear agreements. Conflict is showing us where our agreements are not yet holding us. Dirty dishes, go in the sink. Really simple, basic agreements, but we can also scale that up to, like, what do we do when conflict happens? When we make our agreements explicit, we can be more choiceful about the ways that we want to live together. The third thing is feedback loops. So how do we take feedback? How do we say, well, this agreement is working for me or this isn't working for me? And that we can then feed that feedback back into our agreements, even back into our purpose. Let's start somewhere. Let's start with a really simple purpose. Let's start with 2 or 3 agreements and let's see how it goes. And then let's take feedback and integrate that feedback and then have a new iteration. And that way we can continue moving forward. And I'm finding it really helpful to fight against my perfectionism, which then would keep me from doing anything. So what's shifting for me is, let's just start with where we are, with who we're living with our current neighbors, and how can we bring these principles of clarifying purpose, having clear agreements rooted in nonviolence, and then take feedback and move forward. So, if I'm talking to a 3-year-old or if I'm talking to a business person, I can still be talking about the same need, but the way that I'm approaching it might be different. So I think the same thing is with, to using words like purpose or values or needs or, clear agreements. We can, through trial and error, find what works for some people. But rather than apply it at the group level, you can actually apply it at the self level. So I can have clarity on my purpose. So what is my purpose? And this is one of the things I appreciate about lockdown is I really got clear, my purpose is bring NVC to community living, to support community living as my work for climate change. So what is my work? What is the work of my hands in this situation? The clarity came to me, okay, supporting community living with NVC. Everyone can get that same kind of clarity around their personal purpose. You have relationships if you live in community with community members. It could be your partner, it could be a close friend, it could be your empathy buddy, where they work with you through giving feedback, and then we receive that feedback. So it could be something like, with your empathy buddy, okay, so this is what, can you support me with clarifying my purpose? So I want to be clear, why am I wanting to give this feedback? Am I giving this feedback because I want to support this person in their growth? Am I giving this feedback because it will support our relationship? Am I giving this feedback because it's actually criticism and I'm calling it feedback because that's, sounds nicer and they're gonna, then do what I want them to do? So I think some degree of self-clarity is important as well. And also, I want to check that the other person is available for it, that the other person wants to receive feedback, that the other person, is held in receiving it. Because sometimes, especially because we grew up, at least I grew up in a culture where punishment was a thing. I don't know about you. And that feedback can stimulate those same trauma responses of being punished, where if I do something someone doesn't like, I'm either going to be punished with physical violence or I'm going to be punished with withholding affection or my belonging is threatened. So even if I'm super clear that I don't have any blame or judgment in my feedback, it doesn't mean that the other person is not going to hear blame or judgment, even if I'm using beautiful NVC language. So there's something about checking, hey, I have something about what just happened that I'd like to share with you. I don't want you to hear it as blame or criticism, and I'm worried that you will. So do you want to, check with yourself if you want to hear it right now, or when you might be available to hear it, or how can I support you? But again, that's an individual reaction. That's an individual response, which is why it's supportive, especially in the group environment, even if your group is a group of 2 or a group of 3, to create systems. And systems are just a collection of agreements on a certain topic. So you can create a feedback system, which is a collection of agreements about how we give feedback, how we receive feedback, so that it actually begins to be held by the whole group, rather than, because in order for me to give feedback as an individual, I have to have a certain degree of personal power. I have to have a certain degree of inner something that can leap over the fear that this person's not going to like me anymore if I give them feedback. That can kind of leap over the trauma that I have around my own experiences of feedback, and that can dare to risk how the person's going to react, And it also depends on the other person's kind of personal power and how they receive feedback. But if we take it to the systemic level, if we make a series of group agreements about how the group holds feedback, then we can actually have co-holding on it. The first one is the reason I joined NGL, was to work on community living. So we are nowhere near ready, but we're working towards having offering support structures to communities based on similar to what I've just shared with you, to support them in setting up their systems. What are our agreements on conflict? What are our agreements on dealing with resources? Money complicates things. How are we handling money in a nonviolent way? What are our agreements about that, for example? The other project that I'm working on is we are setting up an apprenticeship program where it's focused on people who want to go to a community and support them in setting up these systems. Other people may want to do something like that, but in the schools or in prisons or whatever it is, but where we can bring this kind of NGL framework out into the world. It's something like, if we only help use NVC to help people to feel happy in their relationships or in their lives, without also teaching them how to change the systems that cause them to have unmet needs in the first place, that we're using NVC as a narcotic.
That's the one, yeah. So how do we not do that?
Yeah, well, I think that it comes back to a systemic level. We've been, at least in the Western world, we've been so trained into individualism. Mm-hmm. At least for me, growing up American, I'm gonna pull myself up by my own bootstraps. That even when we see a systemic problem, we approach it as an individual. What can I do to address this individual problem? And that's not going to work. We need systemic changes.